So who am I? I'm a twin. I have to fast. My older brother, who's perfectly healthy, does not have to fast. Who am I? I'm a 12-year-old girl. Get it? Did anyone get it? Barbara Albert, the only one who got it. Wow. You get to be president. You understand why, right? Her older twin. Oh, Irv, you got it too?
The boy's 13.
No, she's a twin. She's 12. She has to fast because she's bat mitzvah. Her twin brother, who's also 12, does not have to fast. Got it? Okay. That's my sermon for today.
You got 2 hours to go.
Toronto's Jewish community is about 200 years old, but the community really came into its own at the beginning of the 20th century when new Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe came to Canada, fleeing poverty and persecution. From the years 1901 to 1921, Toronto's Jewish community grew from around 3,000 to around 35,000. Can you imagine in just 20 years the community increasing in size by over 10 times? Many of these, I imagine, were our parents and grandparents. Those are the years when my great-grandparents came to Canada. They arrived with very little except a strong desire to work hard and to create new lives for themselves and their families. Life for new immigrants in those years was very difficult. There was rampant poverty, very poor living and working conditions, and none of the social assistance programs that we become accustomed to nowadays that could protect you if you were unemployed or if you were sick. Women were particularly vulnerable to all sorts of exploitation. If they got ill or died, God forbid, it could spell disaster for their families. And Jews faced tremendous discrimination in employment, in banking, in housing, and when it came to admission to higher education, they were subject to a quota system that would cap the number of Jewish students in each year's incoming class. In 1913, 4 Toronto women came up with an idea for a Jewish social assistance program that would begin to address some of these challenges. It was called the Ezras Nashim Society, and women would pay dues, a regular contribution from their pay, and if they ever got sick, they would receive visits and help with chores during those times of illness. The Ezras Nashim joined with many voices in the Toronto Jewish community at the time in decrying the rampant discrimination in Toronto's medical institutions. Jewish patients at Toronto hospitals were routinely being mistreated and denied access to fundamental care and any special needs, like maybe the desire for kosher food while they were staying long-term at the hospital. Toronto's medical schools were beginning to, actually there was only one, Toronto's only medical school, was beginning to accept and certify a small number of Jewish doctors, so long as they weren't too Jewish. But after graduating, these doctors needed to go to England or to the United States for their internships. The Toronto General Hospital, the Hospital for Sick Children, and the Toronto Western Hospital accepted throughout the 1910s 0 Jewish interns. For nurses, the situation was even more clear-cut. Not a single Jewish girl was admitted to any nurse training school in the province of Ontario. The Ezras Nashim Society, this group of pioneering women, took matters into their own hands. They embarked on a major fundraising campaign to create the first Jewish General Hospital in Canada. The campaign took 9 years, and the Hebrew Maternity and Convalescent Hospital, which became Mount Sinai Hospital, opened its doors on Yorkville Avenue in the fall of 1923. This year, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Mount Sinai Hospital, which really was a game changer the day it opened for our community. It started out with just 30 beds, but on that first day, all 40 Jewish doctors in the city of Toronto, all 40 of them joined the staff. Today, as you know, Mount Sinai is a world leader in many different areas of patient care and research, recognized for excellence. We should all remember and celebrate this milestone 100th anniversary with pride. Truly, I could have told many similar stories about various academic and professional institutions in this country who were polluted with anti-Semitism in the early 20th century and who routinely prevented fair and equal access to Jews. Our parents and grandparents had glass ceilings placed over them that needed to be broken, discrimination that needed to be overcome just to simply be treated as a human being and get a fair shot. Sometimes we had to work around the system, like in the case of Mount Sinai Hospital. Sometimes enough pressure and effort helped change the system from within. From quotas to merit, from antagonism to acceptance, from bigotry to equality. This is the Jewish story in this country. And our victories in these areas opened doors for many other minorities later down the road. Knowing our story is a fundamental obligation on these 10 days of repentance. Teshuvah means returning to the truths of who we are and how we got here. And it's no accident that the metaphor for the 10 days of repentance is a book. Storytelling is how we communicate values, how we transmit identity, how we give people a sense of their heritage. Understanding the paths we have walked is the best tool we have for gaining insight and perspective for the future. On these days, we must claim our stories and be accountable to them. This is an obligation we need to assume personally, but also one that binds us to the story of our people's experience in just these past 100 years. The drama of the Jewish people in the past 100 years is one of the most incredible human dramas ever to play out in human history. 100 years ago, we were a weak and powerless people that needed to rely on the kindness of others, but really only on ourselves, knowing that nobody else would come to our aid. That played out in real time when 1/3 of our people were exterminated in gas chambers without more than a peep from the international community. We suffered persecution, had to work hard and fight like the Ezras Nashim did in Toronto, like the pioneers of the land of Israel. We have our challenges these days, but on the whole, we are today a strong and confident people, leaders in many different areas of society, and a people restored to its homeland after 2,000 years of exile. This is our story. It's incredible. We have to know it. We have to own it. We need to be proud of it, because sadly today the credibility and legitimacy of that story is facing unprecedented assault. Justice, fair play, and merit, they meant different things 100 years ago than they mean today. There was a time when Jewish success in fields like medicine were seen as national accomplishments. Today they are evidence of unjustified privilege, systemic discrimination against other minorities, proof that the system was always rigged to favor the wealthy and powerful. While there are no formal quotas anymore in admissions, today Jewish applicants understand that they have to be smarter and work harder than others. The very idea of merit is held in suspicion, and certainly if a Jew is admitted, she better leave any outward signs of her heritage at the door, particularly any attachments to the state of Israel, that maligned symbol of Jewish imperialism and power. Professor Dr. Ayelet Cooper detailed her personal encounters with anti-Semitism and discrimination throughout her tenure at the University of Toronto's Medical School in a peer-reviewed study published earlier this year by the Canadian Medical Education Journal. She reports overhearing colleagues belittling the Holocaust, hearing about non-Jewish students believing their Jewish classmates had the power to block their residency matches, and having to address the refusal of student groups to provide kosher food at school events. She also details personally experiencing anti-Semitism on campus in the form of accusations that she lies to, oppresses, and controls others for her own personal gain. Cooper has even been told, quote, that anti-Semitism can't exist because everything Jews say are lies, including any claims to have experienced discrimination, end quote. Dr. Cooper's report followed the publication of a letter signed by 45 medical school faculty who attempted to cancel Professor Erwin Kotler, accusing him of being an oppressor of the Palestinians. Dr. Cooper's experience is one particular illustration of the legitimacy of our story being assaulted in elite institutions, but this is a widespread phenomenon. Israel has a lot to do with it. Israel's strength and successes heightens perceptions of the wealth and power of diaspora Jews. And in today's world, such power is viewed with suspicion at the least, and often with contempt. This is Shabbat Shuva, where the Rabbi usually speaks about teshuvah, about asking forgiveness and granting it to others in return. Very important. But I decided this year that I ought to speak a little bit differently, that I ought to deliver a slightly different message. Actually, maybe the precise opposite message. The message of what we as a people should not be asking forgiveness for, what we should not be regretting, what we should not be ashamed of. An increasingly number of people are telling us we should be ashamed. They prefer a distorted, false, and manipulated version of the Jewish story. They belittle our parents and grandparents, the giants upon whose shoulders we and many other minorities, for that matter, stand. We reject this. We have nothing to be ashamed of in our story and nothing to apologize for. Surveys from both the American Jewish Committee and the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law revealed that American Jews under the age of 30 are more fearful than previous generations. Half of Jewish fraternity and sorority members feel the need to hide their Jewish identities while on campus. More than half are concerned about being verbally attacked. 37% of Jewish college students fear social exclusion if they reveal their identities. 30% fear being penalized by a professor. 19% are afraid of being physically assaulted. It saddens me tremendously to hear these growing voices of shame and cynicism among our own young people, though I understand where it's coming from, and I understand the desire to be accepted in progressive circles. There's also a unique complexity in this phenomenon. Our enemies today are different than they were 100 years ago. Back then, we faced enemies who were unequivocally bad. They were people who hated us for no good reason, because we killed Jesus, or because we controlled the world, or because we were racially inferior. These lies were pernicious, but they were blatant lies. And for that reason alone, we held the upper ground morally and psychologically. Those trying to delegitimize us were themselves blatantly illegitimate. Today it's more complicated. Jews had to overcome tremendous discrimination in this country to become successful, but Black Canadians and Indigenous Canadians indeed faced more significant barriers to inclusion. That is not a lie. The return of our people to our indigenous homeland is justified and legitimate, but there are others who have legitimate claims on that same land. That is not a lie. Israel does not have a perfect moral record in its dealing with those others. That is not a lie. And we should not sanitize the extremism of the current Israeli government. Their radicalism is also not a lie. But two things can be true at the same time. The false narrative that we are being sold is that the injustices faced by others serves as evidence of our illegitimacy. It leads us towards a desire to apologize consistently for every success and every accomplishment. And we should not. Two things can be true at the same time. The great lesson of the Shoah is that Jewish power and privilege may be messy, may be uncomfortable, may be morally fraught, but the alternative is untenable. And we won't apologize for going there. Two just and fair narratives can coexist. We can be proud of our story while at the same time affirming and valuing and validating the experiences of others. That is a healthy approach, and it is an accurate one. It is interesting that when the rabbis choose to describe the attributes of the Rasha, the wicked child, at the Passover Seder, you would have expected them to choose someone who was sinful or idolatrous, right? The Torah emphasizes the performance of mitzvot. But the wicked child, according to the Haggadah, is not the sinful one, but the one who writes himself out of the story. Lachem velo lo. Remember the Haggadah? The wicked child says, this is your story, but it's not mine. This is an extraordinary insight on what being Jewish means. The commandments are indeed very important, but if a Jew cannot claim his own heritage, cannot recognize where she came from, cannot see the shoulders upon which he stands, he becomes consumed in his own arrogance. He is the Rasha. Let us reject the Rasha's position and try to adopt a stance more in keeping with the wise child. The wise child wants complexity. Well, this is indeed a complex time to be Jewish and a complex time to be a Zionist, but it is our complexity to own. The great achievement of North American Jewry in the last 2 generations was the gradual emergence, after surviving pogroms, poverty, and persecution, of a thoroughly self-confident Jewish community. A community that did not have to speak in whispers. A community that could walk the streets with its heads held high. But in the elite institutions of this country, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is restoring the conditionality of Jewish acceptance that we in Toronto know of too well from 100 years ago. Lies and distortions are being spread that are saying, you're welcome here so long as you repudiate those parts of your Jewishness that we don't like. Too many Jews who once spoke with confidence now whisper. Too many Jews who wore their kippot on the street now wear a baseball cap on top. Too many Jews are feeling ashamed of our own story, and too many are apologizing for things they should not be apologizing for. And so I'll close with what I believe was the most profound statement of Jewish pride and heroism in the face of evil that I've heard in my lifetime. The words of journalist Daniel Pearl, which he affirmed just moments before he was beheaded by terrorists in Pakistan 20 years ago. I quote him, "My father is Jewish. My mother is Jewish. I am Jewish." Never forget that when Daniel Pearl spoke those words, he wasn't just proving a statement of fact. He was proclaiming a proud identity, refusing to hide who he was. He was waving a flag of defiance. He was affirming our imperishable spirit as a people. Today, let us take his final words as a summons, a challenge, and an invitation. We will not apologize for refusing to remain powerless and defenseless in a dangerous world. We will not be ashamed of the successes we've achieved and our parents and grandparents achieved despite tremendous hatred and discrimination. We will celebrate the institutions we've built in this country, which remain models of humanity and compassion and justice for all people. And we will stand proudly with the state of Israel, which remains, despite unique internal and external threats, a shining light unto the nations and a blessing to all freedom-loving people around the world. Sorry, not sorry. Shabbat Shalom. Gemar Chatima Tova.